Hello and welcome to this episode of Happy Baking. In this episode, we're diving into one of my favorite fall treats, a special donut known as the apple fritter. There are lots of ways to make apple fritters, but my recipe is a combination of my favorite fluffy donut dough with chopped apples inside that are fried up to create a crisp exterior and a super soft interior. These fritters can be tossed with a fragrant spiced sugar or finished with a drizzle of sweet icing, and both ways are extremely delicious. In addition to how yummy these donuts are, they are a really fun project when it comes to shaping. It uses a unique method that's fairly easy for all levels of bakers. Making these is a fall tradition for me, and I hope you'll enjoy making them as much as I do. So let's get baking. Let's talk about making the donut dough. This dough is fairly simple. It's a soft yeasted dough enriched with milk, butter, sugar, and eggs. And actually, this is based on the donut recipe passed down to me from my great-great-grandma. I'll start by mixing the dry ingredients in the bowl of an electric mixer fitted with the dough hook attachment. First, the flour. Next, I'll add the granulated sugar, some cinnamon. I'm also gonna add a little bit of nutmeg. This is my favorite ingredient for any kind of donut dough or anything you want to taste like a little bit that nostalgic old-fashioned taste. And then I'm also gonna add some fine sea salt. I'm gonna mix this on low speed to combine just for about 30 seconds. Now I can add my instant yeast. This dough is gonna have an overnight rise, which means we don't really need to use super hot liquid when we mix the dough. What I like to do is melt the butter and then stir in the milk and water. Usually that residual heat from the butter is enough to warm up the other ingredients. And you can do this on the stovetop, but today I'm just gonna melt it really quickly in the microwave, and then I'll stir in the milk and water to combine. We should have Josh put like sound effects. Beep, boop, beep, boop, boop, boop. Ooh, there's some steamy butter. In goes the milk and a little bit of water. I'll check the temperature of this, and as long as it's at least 110 degrees Fahrenheit, 43 degrees Celsius, it's good to go. If not, I might need to warm it in the microwave a little bit more. It's good. Okay, my warm liquid mixture is gonna go into the mixer. The butter, the milk, the water. I'm also gonna add 2 eggs into the mixer. Now I'm gonna mix the dough on low speed for 3 minutes until the ingredients start to combine to form a shaggy dough. Okay, after 3 minutes, you should see that the ingredients have come together fully. It's gonna be a very sticky dough. I wanna give the bowl a good scrape just to make sure there's no dry pockets of flour hiding anywhere. Then I'm gonna raise the mixer speed and mix it on medium for 5 minutes more. At the end of this mixing time, the dough should still be pretty sticky, but it'll be even smoother. Okay, the dough is looking really beautiful and smooth. It's still super sticky. That just means that it's going to be enriched, light and fluffy later. So I'm gonna transfer it to a greased bowl. I'm gonna cover this with greased plastic wrap or a clean kitchen towel, and then it needs some rise time. Now there's 2 ways you can do this. If you want to make the fritters the same day as you prepare the dough, you just wanna let it rise at room temperature until doubled in size. 1 hour and 15 minutes to 1 hour and 45 minutes. But typically, because we're having donuts in the morning, I prefer an overnight rise. So you want to make the dough 1 day ahead of when you want to prepare them. Let the dough rise at room temperature for 30 to 45 minutes until visibly puffy, and then refrigerate the dough for up to 12 hours. I'm gonna cover this and let it rise. I want to say thank you to Craftsy, who is the sponsor for this episode of Happy Baking. Craftsy is an online community of creative, like-minded makers where members can find endless inspiration, advance their skills, and discover their new favorite hobby. Craftsy offers over 2,000 inspiring classes for makers of all skill levels, with step-by-step instruction in more than 20 categories, like knitting, crochet, quilting, sewing, painting, drawing, cooking, baking, and cake decorating. You may not know this, but after a long day of happy baking, I love to paint and draw to unwind. So I bookmarked the art journaling with watercolor, ink, and more class, and I am so excited to take it. Plus, there's loads of amazing baking classes taught by my friends and colleagues, including Jocelyn Delk Adams, Zoe Francois, Jacques Therese, and there's even a class from one of my pastry school professors, Richard Coppage. Every Craftsy course is taught by talented and friendly experts in instructional videos. The instructors walk you through each technique with step-by-step demonstrations, providing their expert tips and tricks. And Craftsy is always adding new classes, so I'm always checking back to stay inspired. Plus, Craftsy has a special offer just for happy bakers. The first 1,000 people to use my link will get a full year of premium membership to Craftsy for only $1.49. This offer is valid for new members only. Head to the link in the video description below to claim your membership. Before I can shape my apple fritters, I need to get the apples ready. So I'm gonna just dice them. I've already peeled the apples. I wanna then cut them in quarters. This is how I dice my apples. And of course, there's lots of ways, but I like to cut the core out. It gives you a nice flat surface for the apples to sit on, which makes it a little bit easier to slice them. The most important thing when preparing these apples is that you want to make sure that they are a little bit smaller and roughly the same shape as our dough pieces. So we just kind of want them to be little bite-sized pieces, ideally. Okay, now that my apples are ready, I can move on to the dough. I'm just gonna get rid of my cutting board, and I'm so excited to show you this shaping method. This is an especially fun shaping method where the dough is cut into small squares. And like I said before, the goal is that the apples and the dough pieces are sort of similar in shape and size. The smaller pieces of dough are also able to ferment a bit more efficiently. Even when they're pressed together a little bit, it makes it pretty easy to get a nice rise, ensuring super fluffy fritters in the end. To shape these fritters, you want to roll out the prepared risen dough on a lightly floured surface into a rectangle about a 1/2 inch, 1 centimeter thick. I'm aiming for a roughly rectangular shape just to get the most evenly shaped pieces, but the exact size or shape of the dough really isn't important because we're gonna be cutting it into tiny pieces and then mushing them together. That's one of the things that makes this such a fun shaping method is it's really not precise and it still turns out really cute fritters every single time. Now I'm gonna use a bench knife, or you could use a pastry cutter or even a sharp knife to cut the dough into long vertical strips about 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters wide. You really don't need to be precise here because again, we're ultimately just gonna be smushing them together. So don't stress about perfection, just have fun cutting your dough. Now I wanna cut the dough again to make 1 inch or 2.5 centimeter wide squares. So I'm just gonna work across the dough. Again, no need to be precise, I'm just aiming for pieces that are roughly that size. So I made all those little cubes and then I just sort of want to visually divide them into 10 even portions on my work surface. And each one of these portions is going to be 1 fritter. Just like cutting the cubes, the rest of the shaping of these is really not precise either. I just want to take about 2/3 of the dough and I kind of form it roughly into a shape by smushing it together a tiny bit with my hands. And then I want to grab 60 to 80 milliliters or 1/4 to 1/3 cup of apples, basically a small handful, and just place it right on top of the dough, pressing it pretty firmly into the dough to make sure that it's kind of adhering to some piece of dough somewhere. I'll grab the remaining 1/3 of the dough portion and place it on top, once again, just kind of smushing it into place. The result is that every piece of apple should be touching dough on both sides, but it's also okay if there's a little bit of apple peeking out. As long as it's touching dough somewhere, that's gonna reduce the risk of those apples falling out during frying. You also don't wanna smush these too much because we want to keep some of that wonky cube shape. So after I get the apples in there, I'll set it aside on my work surface and continue with the rest. Don't be tempted to put too many apples in. As delicious as that sounds, it can really prevent the fritter from sticking together. So stick to that quantity, and if you have a few extra, just add them to a salad, make yourself a little snack. You can let these rise on a floured work surface, but I've got some other baking to do, so I think I'm gonna transfer them to a parchment-lined baking sheet, and I'm going to generously flour it. This dough is pretty sticky, so as it rises, it's only going to become softer. So I wanna make sure that I've really prevented any sticking from occurring, just to make these fritters as easy to handle later as possible. The shaped fritters need some more rise time, and during this time, the dough will ferment and expand a bit more, starting to adhere together even better. So sufficient rising is especially important. I'll let the fritters rise until they're visibly puffy, about 30 to 45 minutes. And while the donuts rise, we can prepare our frying station. Let's talk through the frying station setup. You're gonna need about 2 to 3 inches or 5 to 8 centimeters of oil in a heavy bottomed pot. This is actually a pot that's made for frying, and it even comes with a fry basket. You don't even have to use this basket every time you fry. It kind of depends on what you're doing. It's really great for things like French fries or smaller items. Today I'll probably just keep a spider on hand. If you don't have this tool, you can also use a large slotted spoon in a pinch. I've attached a fry thermometer to help me monitor the temperature while it's heating. That's really helpful both to make sure we don't burn our fritters or that they're undercooked, and it also just helps to keep the whole process a bit safer. I'm also going to need a wire rack on a baking sheet. I usually line it with parchment paper or some absorbent paper towels, and I'm gonna keep that nearby my frying station as well. As you reach the end of rise time, you can start to heat your oil. I'm heating it over medium heat to 350 degrees Fahrenheit or 175 degrees Celsius. Remember that the temperature will drop slightly when we add the first fritter into the oil. So you always want to heat it slightly higher than your preferred frying temperature. Ultimately, we're going to try to keep it around 340 degrees Fahrenheit. While the oil is heating, get your preferred finishing ready. There's 2 options here. There is cinnamon sugar or cider icing. Both are super delicious, so it really just kind of comes down to your preference. To prepare this finishing sugar, just mix the sugar, cinnamon, and nutmeg to combine. Drizzled or glazed with cider icing, the apple flavor is amplified a bit, and that's particularly delightful with these fritters. But the icing is super easy to prepare. I'm just gonna whisk powdered sugar and some boiled cider. Boiled cider is cider that has been reduced by about a third, and it becomes kind of syrupy in texture. You can buy it or make it yourself, and it is my secret ingredient in my apple pie. I use it in so many things during the fall season. If you don't have boiled cider, you don't have time to make boiled cider, you can just use regular apple cider, but the boiled cider is going to have a much more intense, tangy apple flavor. Whichever finishing option you want to use, or even if you want to use a little bit of both, you could do 5 in cinnamon sugar and 5 with icing or glaze. You want to make sure you have it nearby your frying station. Once your oil is hot, working in batches, gently drop the fritters into the oil, frying until they're golden brown on both sides, about 2 to 3 minutes per side. And if you want, you can just lift them with your hands, but I typically drop them in with the spider, just because that allows me to touch the dough minimally. Ooh, it's exactly what you want to hear. You want to immediately see them start to bubble, sizzle. That's a good indication that our oil is hot enough. If your fritters sink to the bottom, that's usually a good indication that your oil is too cold. Aim to keep the temperature of the oil around 340 degrees Fahrenheit or 170 degrees Celsius all throughout the frying. So adjust the heat as needed. Just keep an eye on that thermometer. If it starts to dip down, raise the heat. If it starts to get too hot, drop the heat down. Continue to fry each donut until they're all golden brown on both sides. If you're unsure about doneness, you can use an instant read thermometer to check the internal temperature of the very center. It should read at least 195 degrees Fahrenheit or 90 degrees Celsius. Once they get brown, I can start to see at the edges that they're browning. I'm gonna just gently use the spider to flip. Woo-hoo-hoo! That's a fine looking fritter, friends. Best of all, no apples have fallen out. Everything seems to be adhering really, really nicely. So now I'm gonna fry them on this other side until they're golden brown. It'll take another 2 to 3 minutes. When your donuts are all done, use your spider or slotted spoon to remove it from the oil. I'll give it a couple good shakes just to make sure that any excess oil drips off, and then transfer it to your wire rack to cool. You do want to go ahead and toss them in the cinnamon sugar while they're still fairly warm. So let's toss a couple of these first ones in cinnamon sugar. If you want an all-over glazed look, like a donut glaze, you can apply the glaze while the fritter is still warm. But I tend to like a visible drizzle instead on these, so I'm gonna let a few of my donuts cool completely and then drizzle them with glaze a few minutes later. Like all fried foods, donuts are best when they are served as fresh as possible. So even if you let them cool a little bit, serve them as soon as you can. You won't regret it. It's so crispy on the outside, so fluffy inside. Thanks, great grandma. And the apples, they're juicy, but they still have a little bit of texture. And the cider glaze, it just like takes it to an even more apple-y place. I am obsessed with these apple fritters, and I hope you will be too. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode. You can find the recipe for my apple fritters linked in the video description below or on my website, ErinJeanneMcDowell.com. If this video inspires you to bake, please tag me on social media because I love to see what you're making in your kitchens. You can find me at eMcDowell on Instagram, at Erin Jeanne McDowell on TikTok, and as Erin Jeanne McDowell on Facebook. Until next time, wishing you lots of happy frittering. Just kidding. Until next time, wishing you lots of happy baking. Now leave me alone with these. I said leave me alone.